Well, thank you for turning out this evening. And what I'm going to do is to take a brief canter through the National Museum of the Royal Navy and its development and the issues that face it, because those are the kinds of issues that face many charitable organisations. And you will see that the kinds of things that I'm talking about are in the news and are resonant for government and indeed for charities, and there are all sorts of unresolved issues which I'm going to talk about as we go through this. So firstly, a little bit about the National Museum of the Royal Navy, which is always abbreviated NMRN and is a bit of a tongue twister, but National Museum of the Royal Navy. It was founded in 2008. The Navy at that point had 4 museums. It had a submarine museum, a Royal Marines Museum, it had a Royal Naval Museum and a Fleet Air Arm Museum, and it asked itself, why have we got 4 museums, all of which we are administrating separately? What we need to do is to bring those together into a single organisation which can compete with the National Army Museum, sorry about that, and also with the RAF Museum, the Navy's worst enemy. Never mind the Russians, it's the RAF. So I was appointed to deliver this. And when I asked them why I was appointed, why they appointed me, they said, well, actually it's very simple. You're not an admiral, which is a bit of a plus. And secondly, you know about business, because this is, in effect, a business startup. We're taking 4 things and trying to create something new. Not as easy as it looked on the surface. By the way, they decided they'd only give £100,000 towards starting this new organisation, and the rest we'd have to raise ourselves. Great, it's a good start. Actually backed to the hilt from the first. So a little bit about where we see ourselves. Our vision is quite clear: to be the world's most respected naval museum, underpinned by a spirit of enterprise and adventure. We can't say we're going to be the biggest, because the Americans can outspend us 100 to 1. But as we say, size isn't everything. It's quality that counts. And the Navy has a longer and richer, the Royal Navy has a longer and richer story than any other navy on earth. But we can be the most respected, therefore. And the underpinned by a spirit of enterprise and adventure was very important, because I had heard the Royal Naval Museum, one of those 4 museums, described as Sleepy Hollow. Nothing has happened there for the last decade. And what we want is a bit of enterprise and adventure, some risk-taking in this, because we don't build anything, and we're not going to build anything without taking some risk. Sitting under our vision, of course, is the goal to promote the traditions and the public understanding of the Royal Navy and its constituent branches, past, present and future. Well, that I think is simple enough. And below that we also have a mission to be a beacon of excellence in enabling people to learn, enjoy and engage with the story of the Royal Navy and understand its impact in shaping the modern world. That's actually quite important, because people think of the Navy as just a lot of ships that go around shelling things, and it's got a lot of stuff going bang and there are battles going on. But the way our modern planet functions, we have this globally connected world, actually is not that new. The Navy started creating that in the 18th century, taking on probably from the Dutch in the 17th century, and went on doing that right until the Americans took over. And as it would say in 1066 and all that, this was the Pax Britannica, technically known as the freedom of the seas. And we maintained global trade, and through maintaining global trade and being able to project power using the Navy, we were able to create the kind of world that we now know. Of course, we shaped it to the benefit of Britain. So we're going to deliver all of that by doing some very simple things: collecting, studying and interpreting artefacts and records, offering stimulating, engaging learning opportunities, very important for us, making museum collections as widely accessible as possible, physically and intellectually, building partnerships with other people. We don't have a monopoly on the Royal Navy story. There's a thing called the Imperial War Museum, there's another thing called the National Maritime Museum, and there are 239 other museums which would have naval collections of some sort. And you think, I've missed one of those out. I haven't. The core thing that we want to do is really give people a fun day out. If they don't come and enjoy themselves with us, then we have failed, because nobody learns or engages with a story if they're not enjoying it. They go, oh God, this is some sort of religious exercise that I've got to go through, and the quicker I can get off this site, the better. That's the reverse of what we want to achieve. Our key site in Portsmouth, which I'll talk about in a minute, actually would take 2 days for you to see everything. And more people are coming and doing that. They're coming for a day, and then they're coming back and doing another day with us, realising we've got a lot to offer, and they're enjoying it hugely. Like all businesses, and ours is a business, we clearly need to articulate our values. And our values are that we are authoritative, we are customer focused, and we are creative. I often say to my finance director, you're the only person in the organisation who I don't expect to be creative. I can do without creative accounts. But then I think, is that right? No, it's not. We need to be creative about the way that we mobilise and use and deal with our resources, as we are about any other part of the organisation. And anyone who knows me will know that what I want is everything to change all the time, which is a bit fatiguing for the team, because unless we're changing and moving, we will freeze to the floor. And that's something that some of our stakeholders can find slightly disconcerting. In terms of our strategy, I'm not going to drear through the whole of our strategy, but it's based around 3 pillars, if you like: improving our scale, scope and reach. What I mean by that, excuse me while I rattle my notes so I find out what it is that I mean by that. Scale is national museums have to have a certain level of size, and that really is about the quality and the scale of the collection. Museums will do this thing of we collaborate together. Yeah, sure we do. And we're not competitive. No, of course we're not competitive. I believe that. Thousands wouldn't. And we don't need to build up big collections. We just use the collections that we've got better. That's code for I have a bigger collection than you've got, and I want to make sure that you don't compete with me. Let's be honest. This is a competitive business like any other. We are fighting for customers. We want to attract them in so that we can build our business. And the quality and scope, scale of our collections is crucial to doing that. So yes, I too can be a hypocrite. I say all those nice words and I mean something entirely different. But there we are, life is like that. Oh, sorry, I've skipped on. So scale is about size and quality of collections. Scope is about national museums do things that other museums can't do. And increasingly that is around scholarship. If we look at the museum sector in the United Kingdom as a whole, it is under huge financial pressure. And the way that museums are addressing that is they're hollowing out their expertise and their research ability. There's almost no local authority museum which has preserved it. 1 or 2 honourable exceptions, of course, there are exceptions to everything. Well, national museums ought to focus around scholarship, and they ought to protect it, because it's the collection and the scholarship that supports it which is core to our business. If visitors come into our sites and they feel we know nothing, well, one of our values is authority. If they feel we know nothing, then we have nothing to say, and we might just as well shut up shop. So it's really important to preserve and use and mobilise that expertise. And there are other things too that national museums do that other museums don't. And lastly, we want to extend our reach. The National Museum has deliberate of the Royal Navy. I keep calling it the National Museum, that's what we do. We want to subsume every other museum, of course. But the National Museum of the Royal Navy is an unusual animal. It's headquartered in the regions. There are very few national museums which are headquartered in the regions. It's headquartered in Portsmouth. But it's not sufficient to be the National Museum of the Royal Navy in the bottom left-hand corner of England. What kind of national museum is that? What we want to do is to make sure that what we offer is accessible geographically. So we have built up, are you calm if I walk away? We've built up across the regions. We have museums in Portsmouth. We have the Submarine Museum, as I've mentioned, the Royal Marines Museum, what was the Royal Naval Museum, and we've acquired Explosion. I'll go into that in a minute. But outside this part of the world, we have a Fleet Air Arm Museum in Somerset. As Paul has mentioned, we've got HMS Trincomalee in Hartlepool. We've got HMS Caroline in Northern Ireland, and we will probably add some further things to give us the kind of geographical reach which we think we should have. The Navy was a national and international organisation, and we are building up links overseas as well. So our strategy is based around developing in scale, scope and reach. Now this is not easy with the kind of resourcing that we have, which I'll come to in a minute. Just so I can reinforce that message, this is the Portsmouth site. We have two of these gigantic storehouses, another museum at the end. That's what we started with. Clearly we redeveloped the displays, as we're doing here. But we've added HMS Victory, the single most burdensome gift to any museum anywhere. An utter mess, which I could talk about at some length, but won't. And we've acquired M33, which is a small workaday coastal bombardment vessel, but very important because she's the last survivor of the Gallipoli campaign, which is resonant for this year. She will open on August the 6th, in time for the centenary of her arrival at Gallipoli. On the other side of the water from Portsmouth, hang on, I've changed slides in a curious way, we have a submarine museum built around HMS Alliance, a Second World War submarine, and we have Explosion, Museum of Naval Firepower. It's all the things that go bang, from bullets to atomic weapons, and we actually even have the Polaris missiles to lift the weapons if you wanted to make them go. In fact, when I first came into the museum, I said to one of my colleagues, nuclear weapons, thank God the fissionable material has been removed from them, sort of joke. And he said, this is the Navy, what makes you think that? And then also in Portsmouth, the Royal Marines Museum, and then out in Somerset, the Fleet Air Arm Museum. Well, we do understand why Concorde is parked there, but believe me, she never flew off a carrier. It would only have gone once, I think. Bit of a splash at the end, probably. In Belfast, this is HMS Caroline, the last survivor of the Battle of Jutland. Again, the centenary this year, sorry, next year. She'll be open for the centenary of Jutland. It's mad that she has survived. She was kept in commission for 98 years by the Navy before they suddenly realised that they didn't need it, and it would make jolly good razor blades. That's where old ships go. But luckily, we managed to stop that. And then lastly, HMS Trincomalee, a frigate of 1817, built in Bombay, fabulous survivor. And then around it, a sort of recreated harbour made by the local authority, rather oddly, run by two different organisations. So on one side, you've got these two sets of people doing largely competing things. We have negotiated with the local authority and the Trincomalee Trust to put those things together. You can see that we have been, as it were, on an acquisitions trail, and in doing that, that's a fairly risky strategy, but we've developed partnerships with government agencies, particularly in Northern Ireland, where a large sum of money has been sent sailing our way. Excellent. And here in Hartlepool, where we're partnering the local authority, and they are providing financial support for the project, even in these straitened days. What makes us different, though, from, say, the Imperial War Museum or the National Maritime Museum is our relationship with our service. And the bits that we provide for the Navy are the commemoration and remembrance piece. That's why these guys, which are from 4-5 Commando, have come into the Royal Marines Museum because people from their unit died in Afghanistan and in Iraq and are commemorated in our museum. So there's a very strong link to the Marine Corps. We help the Navy build ethos and efficiency. As my first chairman said, our guys have got to be more afraid of the history behind them than the enemy in front of them if it's going to work. Which I think is actually quite a good encapsulation of what that is about. And of course, we feed into recruitment and retention of people. Because if people don't feel they're valued and what they do isn't commemorated and remembered, then they're not going to stick with it. They'll go on and do other things. And manpower, and indeed woman power, is an important problem for the armed forces. Despite what you hear about lots of people leaving the armed forces, actually recruitment is more or less at an all-time low. So that's the National Museum. Well, what kind of challenges do we face? What kind of challenges do charities face? Well, let's start off with the governance piece. The National Museum is an executive non-departmental public body. What the government amusingly describes as an arm's-length body. What they mean by that is, we want to control you utterly and completely. I'll explain some of the problems that causes. So, sitting at the top, we have Her Majesty's Government. Now, Her Majesty's Government means the Treasury. There are no other departments, of course. Only the Treasury matters, and the Treasury has a very particular and interesting view of life, which bears almost no relationship to the life that the rest of us experience on a daily basis. And that can be disturbing, because they pass their edicts down to the Ministry of Defence, which funds us. So not funded by the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, which is where museums will normally sit, but through the money comes through the Ministry of Defence. The Ministry of Defence is another curious department. It knows nothing about museums. It doesn't know anything about what they're there for. It just has traditionally given us money, and therefore goes on giving us money. Not as much as we would like, but nonetheless they go on giving us money. They don't know what we do, they don't know what we achieve, they're not much interested in. What they really want is to make sure the process is wonderful. Sadly, anyone who knows about the process in the Ministry of Defence has been removed. So we're now in a mad situation where we advise the Ministry of Defence about the process, And they go, really? We didn't know that. Well, of course, all the staff have changed, many have become redundant. And so we have this mad world where we get nuts edicts from the Treasury, filtered through the MOD, which knows nothing about the subject in hand, or indeed the processes they're supposed to be implementing, and we're on the receiving end of it. Sorry, you might think I'm overdrawing this, but I'm not. In fact, if anything, I'm understating it. You know, I'm known for British understatement. One of the problems in all of this is that nobody has noticed that we're also a charity regulated by the Charity Commission, and we're a limited liability company regulated by Companies House. We've got to obey both charity and company law. Or if they've observed it, they've observed something which is quite important, that the Charity Commission is a toothless tiger and about as useful as a chocolate teapot, and Companies House is probably marginally worse. And so what happens is the Treasury, through the MOD, drives the decision-making of a charity, which is, of course, unlawful. They may not fetter the trustees. And in that process, they decide what is public money and what is not. So the latest mad edict is that every pound that touches the National Museum, it must all be public money. And of course it isn't. There is the grant, which comes down through this route, which is public money. And then there is the money that we raise from other sources, which is charitable. The Charity Commission doesn't agree with Treasury, but doesn't like to say so, because it doesn't think it's going to win that argument, or it doesn't want to engage in that argument. And so we're stuck as the piggy in the middle of all of this, where nobody's quite sure what set of rules is being operated and for what purpose. My conclusion is that we're only a non-executive, non-departmental public body, a status for which we are not eligible because we raise too much money from outside the public finances. It's about control. That government can't say, we want these things done, a charity is a good way of doing them, we will give the grant to the charity to deliver certain ends, and that's it. We shouldn't be interfering. It's impossible for government to say that. And this is actually quite difficult. It's quite difficult for me as the accounting officer because I'm responsible to Parliament for our resources for the grant in aid. And it's difficult for the trustees because their judgment at any moment can be second-guessed or overridden by the MOD or the Treasury or a toxic combination of both of them. I haven't said a lot about charity law because, frankly, they're asleep. As long as the accounts go in on time, they're broadly happy. Incidentally, the National Audit Office, who are our statutory auditors, have managed not to deliver the accounts on time, either to the Charity Commission or to Companies House. That's what they did last year.
Can I just ask, if you get from sale tickets, does that count as going through sort of charitable donations?
Well, it is charitable money. It's money earned by the charity, but MOD and the Treasury will treat it as if it were public funds, which it isn't. That's wrong in law. In 12-something or other, we had the Magna Carta, which said basically no one is above the law. Well, that has gone. The Treasury is above the law. And what we have is, that, again, 1066 and all that, barons will be judged by other barons who will understand. And that's what it's about. Senior civil servants will be judged by other senior civil servants who will understand. So this is quite a complicated set of problems for us, which we have to negotiate on a daily basis. But it's all good, clean fun, because in a nice way, they haven't got a fixity of purpose. And if you just say, well, I'm going to do this, you can make the arguments that make the system more or less work for you. Well, probably enough of the MOD and the Treasury and all its wonderful works. Luckily, our structure is much simpler, or not, as the case may be. You will recall I said that we were putting 4 museums together. Now, that was done for very good reasons, that what the Navy wanted to do is to spend less money on governance and more money on doing stuff. Now, that is absolutely sound. And lots of charities, groups of charities, similar charities, are coming together and saying, actually, there's so much overlap between what we do that we ought to come together and pool our resources, because we only need one chief executive, one finance director. You know, we don't need dozens of them. So this is quite resonant. The way we did things is quite resonant for the charity sector. But because each of the museums that we took in was already an existing charity, we had to persuade them to come in. So the sell was, right, your turkeys, I need you to vote for Christmas. As you can imagine, the turkeys weren't keen on voting for Christmas. But eventually we got them across the line. They still exist as charities, but we have all the power, if we want to remove the directors and to change the structure. But nonetheless, we haven't quite got there yet. So we've got 4 subsidiary museums with 4 subsidiary boards. And then we've added things: HMS Victory, separate company; HMS Caroline, again separate; and Trincomalee, a separate company. Now, these don't need to be separate, and those are separate only to hold risk. You wouldn't want to expose the whole of the National Museum to HMS Victory going pear-shaped, because those are big numbers. It would take the whole organisation out. And then we have things which we run as part of the National Museum. We run one of our attractions directly, and we run a joint ticketing and marketing operation for all of the charities in Portsmouth Historic Dockyard. So we have a very complicated structure, and this is a simplified diagram. There are simple trusts hanging off 2 of those, and so on and so forth. So there's lots of other stuff going on. I worked it out for my trustees the other day that we have 114 governance meetings a year, at which we have 193 trustees or committee members. Obviously there's some duplication, and I'm obliged to attend 93 of those governance meetings. The cost of this, and my colleagues attending these meetings, is £170,000 a year. And the cost of auditing this lot, and this is a business that turns over about, in business terms, just under 11 million a year, is another £170,000. It's nonsensical, it's a waste of resource. But if you suggest to any of these guys that we could simplify the governance structure, they become hysterical. So this is a challenge. What we need is one board, one chief executive, one united staff, and that is where we are going. If only my trustees, I would hesitate to criticise my trustees, can pluck up the courage to throttle the turkeys. That's what it comes down to. I think it'll be noisy for about a week, but after that, it will be wonderful. So our governance structure is complex, but that's not unusual in the charitable sector, and it's not unusual when you're trying to bring things together. What is unusual is the amount of resistance to change. Now, we all resist change, of course we do, but what is noticeable is that most of our trustees think it's about them. It's not about the beneficiaries of the charities, it's about them. It couldn't possibly work without me sitting in this seat. And yeah, some of them have done a really good job, but now we need change. So, an interesting challenge for us. So I'm clearly, as chief executive of this merry throng, governance is not for me, that's for my chairman. He runs the board, I run the business. So he has a challenge on his hands. he's a very equable man until he goes into, I think it's now the time they all died, because he was a First Sea Lord. He's not used to being contradicted. Under this complex governance structure, we have simplified the management structure, and in the process of doing that, we have me sitting as Director General. I have fundraising answering to me, we'll see why in a minute, and I have a Chief of Staff who runs the office. It's a sort of military way of describing it, but it's recognised by the Navy, so they know, that's who I communicate with. And under that, I've got 3 directorates: heritage, all the stuff which the museum is about, collections through to looking at First World War wrecks or whatever it is, visitor engagement, making sure the visitors have a wonderful time and there are lots of them, and resources, all that other stuff which lubricates the business, from finance to property and insurance and all that kind of stuff. Very simple structure. We have simplified it in the last month, and then each of those people is now designing a new staff beneath them. It's going to be flat. We're going to stop having the director of Paperclips Submarines, the head of Paperclips Fleet Air Army, rubbish. We're going to teams with generic job descriptions for each team, so this is a team game, and there are going to be a lot less people, but I actually think delivering far more and having far more fun doing it. If it's not fun, we shouldn't do any of this. I mean, that's my... I keep thinking one day it'll be fun. And that's another challenge that faces all national museums and most charities, is how do you get more bang for the buck? How do you make sure that you've got the smallest staff working most efficiently? Because there's one thing that isn't going to happen. No one is going to wave a magic wand and say, here is twice your grant funding. There's only one way, and that is down. Let's look at resources in the museum, talking of down or whatever. This is a slightly out of focus pie diagram of sources of income and how we apply the funds. Biggest source of income for us is charitable donations, usually for projects. After that, it is our trading income, I think, by a short head, because there are 2 blocks which are trading income, and then grant in aid. As you might expect, we spend most of our money on people. And actually, if we stripped out the major projects, that would rise to 70% of our funding on people. It's too high because the people haven't got the resources to do their job. Just to summarise, this is quite a small organisation. We get grant in aid of 3.2 million. That's enough to buy a torpedo for the Navy. We earn 5.4 million from admissions and our trading activities. We have £55 million worth of endowments for HMS Victory. We don't just take the interest on that. What we do is we've got a total returns policy, and we take out whatever we need, but typically 1.5 to 2 million a year to fund the restoration of Victory. And that gives us a sort of total revenue, if revenue is the right word, of about 10 million a year. We already know that we're going to add another million this year because we've taken over another enterprise, and we'll add another million next year because we're going to take over another enterprise next year. Our grant is quite a small proportion of this, about 32%. So, and interestingly, our grant, talking about falling resources, across the recession, the MOD has been quite nice to us. Our total grant has actually risen, but because they've given us sums of money to do specific things. If we strip out those sums of money, it's more or less flat with a blip at the end. and has now just come down into 2015. We've been told to plan for flat cash. Other national museums have lost 30% and will lose another 20% of their funding. We can do this because we only cost about a torpedo's worth. And the MOD just loses these numbers in the rounding. And if you go and talk to them, they will actually make slips, and they'll go, your grant in aid is 300 million a year. No, you've got 2 extra noughts on the end of it, because they think in those kinds of numbers. So resources not too bad. But for a small organisation, again, this is quite typical of particularly heritage charities, but also many other categories of charities. We're very heavy on capital expenditure. So you can see that the total is £108 million for completion by 2035. And this is not the total picture because we're inventing new projects as we go on. But we've restored HMS Alliance, 6.5 million. We have created new galleries in Portsmouth at 4.5 million. We've got a £60 million investment programme into HMS Victory, which will not be completed before 2035. We are spending 15.5 million on HMS Caroline, 2.5 million on M33. That's all funded down to here. We are planning then to spend another 16.5 million on moving the Royal Marines Museum into the historic dockyard and creating a collection centre. And we are going to spend around 3 million restoring what is, that just trips off the tongue, LCT 7074. It's basically a large metal tank that was used, it's a tank landing craft that was used at D-Day. It's the last survivor of D-Day. So we just picked that up off the bottom of Birkenhead docks, raised it and moved it to Portsmouth. And that's about half funded, that project. So we've got a huge amount of capital investment going in, which is great, except, of course, you can see in an organisation that's got a revenue budget of about 10.5 million, we've got a cash flow problem that we've got to manage. And that is very common with charities. Lots of stuff happening, special projects happening, and that provides challenges because all of these grant awarding bodies who will give us the money, and I'll talk about those in a minute, clearly give us the money in arrears. So we've got to find witty ways of making sure we don't fall over, because cash, as you know, is more likely to kill you than anything else. How is that capital funded? Well, the Heritage Lottery Fund has given us nearly 25 million for our various projects. I love the Heritage Lottery Fund. They are marvellous people. I will never criticise them. MOD has given us 26 million. You think, well, you've been very rude and critical about MOD, and here are, they've given you 26 million. Well, actually, what they did was give us 25 million to take Victory away. Just here, have this money. As long as you do it by the 31st of March, you can have 25 million. After that, no. So in 10 weeks, I think, we sorted that problem out. So it's 26 million for Victory and 1 million investment in the rest of the museum. High net worth individuals, again, distorted by Victory, because when the Navy gave us, MOD gave us 25 million for Victory, one very rich individual, Sir Donald Gosling, said, well, I'll match it with 25 million. I'll write the cheque. And actually, he did give us a cheque. I think he's a bit old-fashioned. And other high net worth individuals also come in. Difficult for us to do this when you're outside London. If you live in the magic circle of London, getting hold of high net worth individuals is I would never say easy, but it's easier because there are more of them around. If you ask any of these people to travel to Portsmouth, they just look blank. Or they heroically say, well, where do I land the helicopter? We've raised about 5 million from various charitable trusts and foundations. We've done quite well at that. Very, very competitive now because, of course, everybody has got a vertical breeze up their backsides and they're out fundraising like there's no tomorrow. Good fundraisers, very difficult to find, and huge amounts of applications pouring into these trusts. We raise quite a lot of money from events. Because we've got Victory, we can do dinners on the lower gun deck. People like to come to those, or we can do weddings, and we not on Victory, but we do in many of our sites. And if you're really rich, you can hire the great cabin in on Victory, and that costs you 25,000 quid. And people do it. So over the 5 years, 6 years that we've existed, we've done quite a lot of that. And there's been quite a lot of gifts in kind. Again, the MOD has been startlingly generous because it gave us £7.5 million worth of wood towards the restoration of Victory because they had it in store. Actually, once you test it to say, is this fit for the purpose, we just need to test this stuff, 95% of it fails its tests. Because they were very focused on what tree it came from and having a sustainable procurement policy, and gave no thought at all to what the quality was when it came out at the other end. So that's basically £7.5 million worth of public money down the tubes. But who knows, in the Ministry of Defence, it's not, I don't think it's material to the accounts in the Ministry of Defence. But we've had other gifts in kind as well, and they're quite important. So all this fundraising effort goes on all the time, and one of the major focuses of the business has to be, how do we get the capital to renew the business, to invest in it so we get more people through, and part of that, of course, is understanding what our visitors want. And in very large part, they like the stuff we're doing now, but they don't like what has been done in the past because tastes, interest, and the ways that people engage with us have changed over time. Our visitor numbers are drifting upwards as we have worked. So I would expect them to top 1 million inside 2 years. We're doing less well on our websites. We should be doing a lot better than that, and we will. We've got a huge number of people coming to non-formal learning activities on the sites. That's risen very sharply. And lots of people coming to formal learning activities, which is all good for us. So just in conclusion, I think this is the most appropriate slide to put up. This is what running a charity feels like. You've got to have a great sense of balance, no sense of fear, and you just got to hope you have a soft landing. But it is enormous fun, and although I'm very cutting about lots of people who are stakeholders in our endeavour, in their own mad ways, they are probably trying to help. I just wish some of them would stop. Thank you very much.